Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of January 23rd, 2025. At this time, I'll call the meeting to order, and we will start with the land acknowledgement. Grimsby is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendurong, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and the town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. At this time, I will ask all of our committee members if they have any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests that they would like to share. And I see no hands up. Before we actually approve the agenda, I'm just going to welcome our newest member, Paul Demare. Welcome, Paul, to the committee themselves. At this point in time, I don't know if you'd like to say a few words, introduce yourself or anything like that. So Anthony will help you with that.
All right. So I'm sorry, the late Paul Demare is here. I'm glad that I was chosen to address this committee. I've only been in Grimsby for about 7 years. I came from Toronto, where it's much bigger population and much bigger tax base and a lot more things going on, but came to this lovely spot called Grimsby as a beautiful spot. This is carved between the escarpment and the lake, and it's just so picturesque and beautiful, and I've just enjoyed all the years I've been here. And I also look at it from my view, I want to make sure that the residents of Grimsby all enjoy the benefits of being here, but also can afford to be here. And therefore, also we can afford to provide these informations to them and these additional projects going forward. So I just wanted to be part of that committee as a financial. And my background was Toronto, doing multiple budgets for the large insurance companies. So we know how to manage a buck. So the point is, this was about something I like to do, just to hopefully we can help the city navigate the perilous times coming for us. And I just got off, I was listening to the radio, and half the Canadians are having a hard time with their budgets. So it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we don't make it more difficult for them. So thanks again, and thanks for the welcome.
Thank you, Paul. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. And before we do approve the agenda, we just want to share with you that we're going to amend the order of the agenda. So Finance Report 25-09, which deals with, which will be a presentation from Carlos Alvarez of KPMG, will be moved up in the order and will become item, will become which item now?
Just the first discussion report.
Okay, it'll be the first discussion report in the order of this. So could I have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as amended? That's Councillor Howe, seconded by Councillor Karstanji. Then by show of hands, resolve that the January 23rd, 2025 Finance Committee agenda as amended be approved. All those in favor?
In favor, Leanne.
Thank you, Councillor Vardy. Item number 6 on our agenda is receipt of the previous minutes. And so the minutes of October 24th, 2024 were circulated, as well as the minutes of the Grimsby Economic Development Advisory Committee of January 14th. Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive those minutes? That would be Member Thompson and Councillor Howe seconding that. So I'll read the resolution first before we vote on it. Resolve that the Finance Committee minutes of October 24th, 2024 and the Grimsby Economic Development Advisory Committee minutes of January 14th, 2025 be received. By show of hands, all those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. Councillor Vardy?
In favor.
Thank you. Okay, so under item 7, which is now delegations and presentations. Today we have with us Mr. Frank Mealy, who is our Economic Development Officer, and he is here to present GDAC's annual report for 2024. And we'd also like to acknowledge Councillor Frake, who is here as the chair of that committee too. So the floor is yours, Frank. Before we begin, though, I need to just ask you, do you want us to save our questions to the end? Would you like us to acknowledge questions during the presentation, or does either method work for you?
I think the best thing is let me speak so that I have a train of thought. And then maybe at the end, if you can shut down your questions, then I can answer them.
Okay, sounds good. You have the floor.
The objective this evening is to provide you with a little bit of a report of what we've been doing for the past year. And it's wonderful to just have a paper format so that you can review it at any time. But it's also better to see me in person and we can ad-lib in a few things. So that's why we're here. Look, here's the Grimsby team that I call, because, you know, it's in economic development, as you know, we just have me, myself, and I, and Councillor Reg. So, but actually, I source all the employees in our community, and especially in our workforce. The next one shows you the GDAC. Of course, we source the mayor, but I work very closely with Councillor Reg, sorry. And just today, for example, he was with me all day. We met with 4 different investors in our community and thinking of locating in our community. And without the assistance of somebody from council or senior management, it's challenging to attract investment. So that's our team there. That's the GDAC group on the right, just to give you an idea of who we are as a GDAC, Grimsby Economic Development Advisory Committee. I want to go through very quickly a lot of these. There's about 35, 40 slides, just to talk a little bit about what we have been doing with our webpage. We have a new web page for the corporation, but we also have a new web page for economic development where you can find a lot of information on there. Go ahead. We did a community profile. I'm very proud of this because every community should have a community profile. We never did. All the demographics, labor force, and quality of life, all those factors that you need to make a decision in a community, you can find it here. If you can't, you just pick up the phone and you call me and I'll fill in the gaps. So the community profile, I think you should take a look at it on the website. It is excellent. Provides the investors with a lot of information and existing businesses who want to expand here as well. We have the concierge program. The concierge program is a good example. Is today we help our local businesses who want to expand. We actually meet with them, hold their hand through the planning process, and we try to expedite it. Some examples of that is the Grimsby Innovation Center, which we met today. Anatolia is a major development that will take place this year. Hopefully the construction will start this year. At the west end of our community, there's 36 acres, 650,000 square feet, approximately 500 new jobs by the end of the build, and it's a major investment in our community. The Grimsby Innovation Center, we met with them today actually, and we are keeping NRB, now called TN, I forget the name of them. Yeah, we're keeping the existing business here in town in 120,000 square feet. They're building a new one starting in the spring, and there's another 360,000 square feet to be built as well. So in all, we estimate about 450 jobs to be created in that little quadrant. We're also working with some doctors out of Hamilton that also practice here in our hospital. To do a medical imaging clinic, and they've submitted their business plan to the Ministry of Health, so hopefully we'll get MRI type of imaging in our community. We're working with daycare, quite a few daycare projects. We got about 3 or 4 on the go. And daycare, why is that an economic development element that we should attract in our communities? Because labor is very difficult to get, and more and more people in the family are working, and daycare is very, very important. So it is an economic development incentive to attract those kinds of uses. Go ahead. Tourism strategy. Well, we finally received, after 2 years of going after the provincial government, we finally received the matching fund of $30,000 as of January 7th. So we have sent out the RFP, and we anticipate that the final report will be hopefully completed by the end of May. We participated at the Ontario Tourism Summit this past year, and of course, this is a picture of Gateway, where there's a lot of information there. But one of the key components about tourism is that most communities, all Niagara, of all places, there's a lot of strategies that have done. Most communities have some tourism strategy. I don't think we've had a tourism strategy in our community. This will be the first one that's going to outline exactly our goals and our objectives, our actions, how much it's going to cost, and by when for the next 5 years. So we anticipate that tourism will be a major component of the economy of our community. Now, a good example of a good strategy towards tourism is IPM, the International Plowing Match that's going to take place in September of this year. That's a classic example of what is the economic impact of such a festival, or I guess you call it a festival event. You're talking about $25 million that can come with between 3 or 4 days in our community. So that's a tourism event, and we should be proactively working with neighboring communities in the region to ensure that it comes to our community. Hotels, restaurants, B&B, all will benefit from it, and they will come through Grimsby. Next. We're also initiating this year the Business Ambassador Program. When we visit industries and when we attract investments to come in our community, what we find is that it's wonderful to speak to the mayor and Councillor Edge and myself, but people in the business, investors really want to speak to other investors, other businesses that are here, that are located here, and want to ask them questions about how do you find the development process, how do you find working with the politicians here, what is the quality of life, and do they have good soccer fields and so forth. The purpose of the Business Ambassador program is to identify some candidates who are either live here or have a business here that are senior executives in that company that can help economic development efforts to attract and retain businesses. We currently have about 21 candidates that we are dealing with, and there's going to be a major media campaign to go at large in the next couple of weeks. So that's going to help us. It's just to increase our economic development team. The Development Industry Liaison Task Force we started last year, and the reason why we started this was to bring together the senior management of the corporation of Grimsby and the development industry so that we could talk in general discussions about issues that concern us, whether it's the housing industry or whether it's technical issues relating to facilitating the development process. The past couple of meetings that we've had were very successful, and we anticipate continuing having those meetings on a quarterly basis right here in this room. Okay. In association with that, we also have the development process analysis that we are currently undertaking. And the reason why we're doing this particular project is because we've identified, again, that our development process is kind of slow. And we want to identify where are those potholes, and we want to fill them. So we've had meetings internally with planning, engineering, public works, and finance, and now they're having meetings with the external development industry, their contractors, their consultants, and so forth, to get their viewpoints on how they view our community and where are some of the challenges that we need to fix. We anticipate the report to be completed by the end of February, March, and we'll be discussing with the CAO and the senior management on how we can fix whatever we find. I'd like to talk a little bit about business expansions that have taken place in our community this past year, and I'll highlight just a few. CISO Lift, located here, 60,000 square feet, 15 jobs. They're out of Quebec, and they've expanded. They were in 25,000, then they expanded to 60,000 in this past year. We also have VTR, which we went to visit today. They've got about 67, 70,000 square feet, 86 jobs. They're going to be expanding to 7,000 square feet, 15 jobs this year, because they will be onshoring their CNC machinery, and they will be spending about $10 million in that small building of 7,000 square feet. And that's a good news story, actually. Go ahead. Another, and I'm highlighting.
Frank, I'm just going to interrupt for one moment. So typically we give our delegation so many minutes. So I don't know how many slides you have left, but I do want to have time for questions too.
Okay.
So if I can just ask you to fast forward through it, that would be good.
Here's another example of Precision Metal Works. Again, small company, but 7,000 square feet. Everything adds up to, from a commercial industrial perspective. Go ahead. Yep. And these are some of the investment attractions that we're trying to, that we attracted was Demount Trailers, very large company, purchased an existing building, 50 people will be working there this year. And this is what they do. Next. Century Condos, as Gabe is here, 85 units. Here's an example of when we did the groundbreaking ceremony, and this is the hole. I'm sure that they've done a lot more than just that hole right now, but it's amazing. It's going to improve our downtown, of course. Next. Again, DeSantis Homes is building 133 units. That's a typo there, 133 units, purpose rental units. I think this is the first one for many, many years that we haven't seen, and hopefully we'll get everything approved and start building in the end of this fall. Go ahead. Bright Space, of course, you know about that one. Go ahead. Major refrigeration, this is important. I think you need to know about this. This is the first company that I attracted in Grimsby. It's 155 jobs, 27,000 square feet, and they want to expand. Great company. Vermeer headquarters, multinational company right here in our backyard, and they're just building it as we speak. Go ahead. This is Grimsby Innovation Center that I talked about, the former NRB site. This is where I was talking about 360,000 square feet, 400 jobs. Go ahead. Anatolia Business Park, again, I talked about this. This is your site plan and where it's located. Next. Go ahead. Oh, here's a company X. I can't divulge the name, but it's a Toronto developer that wants to build a couple of buildings for 100,000 square feet at the Nels and Clark area next to the police station. Business events that we've been doing is the round table, as you know about the round tables, where we bring industry and our staff together to talk about issues. Go ahead. The Mayor's Business Breakfast. Last year we had a great speaker, and this year we're going to have an even greater speaker in February 27th. Put it in your calendar. At the Leona Training Facility. The Mayor's Golf Tournament, we also participated in that. And next. This is, sorry, the slides are out of sync, but at the Leona Training Center, we'll have the Mayor's Business Breakfast on February 27th, so hope to see you there. I think we're almost done. Marketing, we did quite a bit of marketing. These are some of the examples of the marketing. We can flip through this because I'm sure if you really want to learn more about it. We were even on the billboard on the Gardner Expressway there, as you can see it. Go ahead. Yeah, these are just what it would look like inside, so I'm sure that if you're interested, you can always give me a call and I'll provide you the information. Go ahead. These are some stats about where the brochures or the magazines are sent to. Go ahead. We also initiated a new program, a certificate in appreciation of our businesses that are already existing here. And this is the certificate that we provide to all of our new businesses. We went to visit 25, I believe, this past year. These are, we also put them on Facebook and LinkedIn. These are the names of the businesses. Go ahead. These are some of the pictures of the business that we went to visit with the mayor, and some members of council were with us. I know that Councilor Jennifer was there as well. Go ahead. And we had a delegation from the Philippines, from Baguio City, that came here, and we showed them around a bit, and they even went to see a apple orchard. Go ahead. This is the group. And this is very important, and I just want to hold on here for a second. These are the key performance indicators as part of our annual report. You'll see them there. I want to highlight the fact that our objective is to change that ratio, the tax ratio. 90% is residential and 10% is industrial, commercial, institutional. As we go through these developments, hopefully that will change a little bit. I know that the treasurer is just rubbing his hands and saying, good, more taxes in. Go ahead. So all that information I just talked about is in the annual report that you can have, and you can view it anytime. Go ahead. And just finally, I want to talk about the key initiatives in this year. We have the tourism strategy, the ambassador program, the development process project, the liaison task force, the ongoing corporate visitation program, which is so important. You know that 80 to 90% of all the new jobs created in a community come from the existing businesses. So it's imperative for us to make sure that we're, visiting our local businesses all the time. That's important for us. Okay. So keep up the good work, members of council, because you're doing a great job. Any questions?
Any questions from committee members?
No question, but I'd just like to say, well done. It's a lot of work, and I think it's really valuable for attracting business.
Thank you.
I think on behalf of the committee, before we let you go, I do have a few questions or comments to share with you. As I'm sure you're well aware, we have a number of vacancies downtown. And can you share with this committee sort of how you approach issues like that?
How to attract investment back to downtown and fill up some of those holes, yes. Well, I've talked to quite a few businesses that want to locate downtown. However, they're going to be waiting a little bit, not only because of the economy and these elections and what's happening in the States and all that, albeit it's retail, but still, when you have companies like PV Mart closing down in Grimsby and leaving a 30,000 square foot building empty, it's happening everywhere. Consolidation is happening, and it's challenging to attract retail and businesses in general. And of course, compounding the issues is also the fact that we have restructuring taking place downtown, and with our roads infrastructure. I believe that in the next year or less, I think we're going to see those empty buildings filled up. Hopefully, once we finish downtown. Councilor Reg and I went to Port Hope a while back in the fall, and Port Hope was ripping out their entire downtown, and their biggest challenge was parking. They couldn't get people to go on the road because there were no parking spots, or to get to the parking spots. We, in Grimsby, at least have those walkways that connect the parking with the downtown. So there's that opportunity that businesses will stay open. But we're working on that.
As long as you're aware of it, I think that's the important part, to know on your list of inventory, which addresses and units are empty and available to rent. That's good. You talked about the tourism report that you're going to be working on for the benefit of all the downtown improvement area members. Could you just talk about the role and how you see that integrating with them?
Good question, because, our objective is to bring together all the stakeholders into the fold, and making sure that the tourism strategy includes their issues. So the Chamber, the DIA, the TPN is going to be part of it. Our surrounding neighborhood municipalities will be part of it as well. So we will engage with them quite well.
And then my last question has to do with the Business Ambassador Program. It has been tried a number of times before in the history of our town. Can you share with us what you think was learned from prior attempts at it and how you see it being different or better this time?
Well, you have me here. That's number one. Number two, I don't want to be flippant about that, but I actually have done these ambassador programs when I was working with the city of Scarborough and the city of Vaughan for many years, and they've worked very well. But the key behind these ambassadors is that you got to keep them engaged. You must utilize them. You must engage them at various events and keep them up to date on what's happening in your community, so that when they do go out and travel abroad or just in the GTA, they can speak proudly about their community. A lot of it is about communications and making them feel part of the community. And because they're business people, they want to know about what's happening in their backyard. I believe that we have a strong crowd of candidates that we're going to be training them. We're going to engage with them on a quarterly basis. They're going to be part of our GDAC meetings if they wish to participate, and events like that we do corporate-wide. So I think it will work out very well. I've had experience for many years in dealing with these ambassadors, and it's never been a downer, it's been an up.
Good, thank you for your answers to those questions. Committee members, one last chance. Any questions that anyone has? Councillor Howe.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I'll use my indoor voice then. There's a group, and the picture was there, that are on the GDAC committee, and business people from town, successful business people from town, very committed business people from town. As good a group, and I've had the pleasure to meet them all, as good a group of representatives that you could ever hope to have, ever hope to have. They're just, they're intelligent, they're smart, they know what reality is, and they give a damn.
Thank you for those nice words about the committee members. Then thank you, Mr. Mealy, for your presentation this evening. It's evening now, and it's dark out already. Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive this delegation? Councillor Crisangi, and the seconder is Councillor Howe that I saw. So received that the delegation from Frank Mealy, Economic Development Officer, regarding GDAC's 2024 annual report be received for information. All those in favor, by show of hands, please. That is carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Item number 8 on our agenda are consent reports, and we have no reports at this time. So we'll move on to number 9, which are discussion reports. And as we said before, we're moving one of those forward. So basically at this time, the 2024 external audit planning report, and we have, I think, with us I haven't had the pleasure of meeting these two gentlemen, so I'll ask you to introduce yourselves, but I believe this is Mr. Carlos Alvarez and Mr. Daniel Glassbergen from KPMG. Do I have that correct? Thank you. Welcome here. Before we have you speak, though, I'm just going to ask to have a mover and seconder to move this onto the floor for discussion. So Councillor Howe and Councillor Korstanji have moved and seconded that, and the floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening to all of you. It's awesome to be here for our first time, and I do see a familiar face here. So on behalf of KPMG, we're glad to be here to present the audit plan for the fiscal 2024 year. And Daniel and I will go through some of the items that we feel are most significant to bring forward to your attention. Certainly, we are at the early stages of the audit process, and we will highlight to you some of the main components of our audit approach. In terms of highlights, a few slides into the presentation. In terms of highlights, if we can move it forward. Here's great. So in terms of highlights, just as a refresher to members of council and other members, we have two sets of rules that we follow. We have our auditing rules that govern how we conduct our audits. There was one notable change which impacts how we do an audit, but it has no impact on the information that we will request of your management team. From an accounting standpoint, in terms of how your management team prepares the financial statements, there was one change in the underlying accounting standards. But again, for most municipalities, this accounting change did not have a significant impact on municipalities. So from a regulatory standpoint, it's a quiet year in terms of 2024. As auditors, certainly we do not audit every single transaction. On the next slide, we've shown some dollar figures that represent our level of tolerance and our scope. If we can move, yeah, perfect. So 1.4 million, if you can think of that as our overall tolerance. So when we present to you our audit findings and we tally any and all adjustments, we will add them together, and we will see how close it is to that $1.4 million mark. Individually, $1.4 million is a really big number. We as auditors have a much lower tolerance for audit differences, and that is set at approximately 70,000. So any differences that we uncover, whether it's sampling, looking at reports, that exceed $70,000, we are required to bring those forward and discuss those with you when we do present our audit findings report. Moving along further in the report, again, I already spoke to the auditing and the accounting changes, so we can skip forward. Certainly as auditors, from time to time, we do rely on your specialists. For example, if you use an actuary to assist you in measuring some of your liabilities, we don't simply blindly use their report. We assess the report, and we conclude as to whether or not it's appropriate. So certainly to the extent that any of those specialists are used, we will do audit procedures on the reports that they provide. Moving along in the presentation, for those of you who love financial statements, you'll notice that on the front page of your financial statements, it has the word consolidated. Consolidated means that there are individual components. So we do procedures on the components, and then obviously you have the hydro entity as well. And this slide basically shows that between all of the files that we have, we effectively audit all of the pieces or all of the components. Moving forward in the presentation, so from a risk perspective, we do meet with management. We do discuss, interim results. We ask questions about, are there any unusual items? Have you changed any of your controls? Have you changed your processes? And so from our standpoint, this slide summarizes some of those major areas of our file where we concentrate our audit focus. So if you think of tangible capital assets, just given the sheer size, taxation revenue, government grants, those are all of the different areas that we focus in on. The first two rows have a unique color. If you look at the bullet point, we would like to highlight that for every audit in Canada, this would be for every municipality, every organization, we're always required to spend and provide a little bit more attention to those first two bullet points. The first one is management override of control. This is a risk that exists with every organization, and this is the risk that your management team goes around documented controls and does something that is not above board. So we respond to that specific risk in our file. For example, we select journal entries that were manually prepared by your management team, and we assess using certain criteria. Do those manual journal entries make sense with operating a municipality? Think about it like an anti-fraud control. The second row is the risk that management will misrecord your revenue, that they will either inflate or bring down your revenue that you reported to achieve some desired result. So that is a risk that we do consider in our audit file. The management override of controls, that is a risk that we always have to address. It's not rebuttable, but the risk of revenue recognition is rebuttable. So we have rebutted the fraud risk because when you think about your revenues, for example, from taxation, that is relatively straightforward. There's not a lot of element of management judgment or management estimation. So while we rebut the fraud risk, we still do procedures over completeness, existence, and accuracy of your revenues, but we don't specifically consider it to be a fraud risk. The next few slides, I was not planning on going on in any detail, but if you look at slide 11, 12, 13, and 14, they provide a little bit of the flavor on the actual procedures that we do in each of those areas. These are very consistent with other municipalities that we do in Ontario. And we do have a municipal network where we use others as a sounding board if and when we detect anything that might be considered out of the norm or unusual. Flipping further in the slide deck, one more slide, please. This is a really important slide. In a successful audit results or needs to have an open line of communication, between yourselves and us as auditors. Certainly, when we present our audit findings report, we will ask you questions about, are you aware of anything that is deemed suspicious? Are you aware of anything that would be considered fraudulent? Are there any concerns that you would like to bring forward to your auditors? So from today until when we present the audit findings report, to the extent that anything comes to mind, certainly you have a direct line to myself so that we can work through any concerns that may occur and that may happen. And certainly, we do recommend, whether it's an audit committee, a board, or a council, to continue to ask management those very important questions about, how does the organization maintain a properly well-staffed, functioning finance group? How do you ensure you have proper controls, et cetera? So if you need any assistance with what are some of those questions that you should ask, again, welcome to share some of our insights. Moving forward in the report, we are getting very close to the end. Just in terms of timelines, again, typically the March to June period is our municipal season. We will coordinate with management to set all of the dates. We do expect that when we do start the audit process, that management provides us with a complete package. Certainly, We don't expect the package to be 100% complete, but our expectation is that it's substantially complete, so we can keep our folks busy and efficient. Moving along to the next slide, please. We can go one further, actually. Just in terms of independence, independence is a cornerstone of our profession. What independence means is that whether it's in appearance or in fact, we are not members of your management team. We are not bookkeepers. We're actually sometimes not good at debits and credits in terms of bookkeeping. We're good at auditing. So our role is to audit your books and records. So one of the lines in the sand, that we are very careful of is that, if management is asking for guidance, certainly we can provide overall guidance, but ultimately, they need to take ownership for what goes into your financial statements. And we just need to make sure that, we are the watchdog, we're the second set of eyes, and that we're not doing the work and then auditing our own work. And I can confirm with you that as of today, we are independent. We haven't provided any of those services that would put us offside. And again, I will report to you on independence when we do present the audit findings report. Okay, moving along. There are a bunch of appendices. I'm just going to speak to them on this slide. We do an annual engagement letter that outlines all of the terms and conditions. All of the items would be consistent with the proposal process that we went through in 2024. Technology, only want to mention, obviously, we are all aware of, cyber attacks that have hit various municipalities in the last few years. We are welcome to, provide a complimentary session on what insights do we have that we can share with you in terms of, what's the low-hanging fruit that you need to be aware of. Obviously, for those municipalities that have had hacks, you can go up and down the highway and you can obviously, I'm sure you've all heard the news about the level of disruption. So this is not part of the audit, but if you want to hear from us, we're happy to come in and talk about it. Appendix D just has some links in terms of other insights that you can use as part of you discharging your responsibilities. Again, this is our first time talking together. I just want to make sure that we are happy to be a sounding board. The meter's not always running. So if you want to pick our brain on, for example, back office transformation, lean, we're happy to give you sort of our insights and share with you what the journey could look like, and then you can do with that what you wish. So with that, that would cover what in my mind are the important topics as part of an audit plan. Certainly we look forward to a smooth audit, and we're eager to get started. So with that, I'll pause and back to you, the chair.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm going to ask any committee members if they have any questions or comments. Councillor Howe has his hand up first.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just quickly, Clara, is that proprietary to KPMG?
Through you, the chair, yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Member Demare?
You mentioned cyber protection. So you provide that sort of counseling on that, or do you get into the actual insurance protection coverage issues?
Through you, the chair. So again, firstly, it is separate from the audit. All firms and many consulting firms across Canada provide various level of services. There are probably 15 different types of cybersecurity services that could be offered. Different organizations are at different points in their journey. And, my comment to all of you would be simply continue to evolve how you defend. And if you find that you're weak in one specific area, certainly you can just strengthen that one area. So if there's 15 services or 15 categories within cybersecurity, maybe do a current state assessment and see what are those areas in which maybe you need to bring up a little bit further. So there are a lot of categories within cybersecurity.
Do you provide that service, or you give it to third parties?
We provide the service. We like to stick to auditing, being myself and Dan. In our advisory group, we have those individuals who specifically deal with cyber.
Good.
Any other committee members with questions? Member Thompson.
Yes, through you, Chair. This is to the director. Director, how will we choose, like, the people that KPMG will be interviewing? In 36 years I worked here, from middle management to senior management, I not once seen any involvement in this process, and I'm hoping that middle managers are involved, because sometimes there's a disconnect between the manager and the director. And I'm just curious, how does that work? Because I believe in my days, it was always the director of treasury that was involved, and we were lucky to see anybody. Just curious.
Yeah, through the chair, yeah. Certainly they have access to anyone on the team. They're going to be on site when the audit takes place for, I believe, a week or two. And yeah, we introduce them to everyone, and we just make sure that they are welcome to speak to anyone they wish regarding any of the matters.
Any other questions from committee members? Then I will be last and ask a few questions if I could. You made reference to the audit committee, and as you may or may not be aware, such an animal does not exist here. But the terms of reference of the finance committee do cover the audit function, so in effect, you are speaking to the audit committee as well as the finance committee. Just wanted to be upfront with that. My second point has to do with the Business Improvement Association. As you may be aware, it is transitioned to become financially independent, as we call it, using their own software and so on. They did a transition in the last quarter, really, of the fiscal year. Would you just like to expand upon the impact that this has on your audit procedures?
Certainly. And on the first comment, whether it's audit committee, council, we always like to use the term those charged with governance, which is pretty much consistent across all organizations. With respect to the second question on the BIA, as they move to a independently funded or sourced entity, we as auditors, step number one, we always have to understand the processes. So to the extent that their processes are unique or different, we will have to document those processes that they have, which could be different from those of the town. And certainly, one of the items that we do actually look at is going concern. Going concern is a topic that is relevant even in the municipal sector. So it's great that, they are becoming independent, which means that they would have less of a going concern issue if they can sustain operations on their own, without the assistance of the town. But effectively, we treat them as a separate audit. And so we would audit them and design a separate file, based on their uniqueness of their processes. Does that answer the question?
I think we probably should clarify a few things,
Sure.
though. One, they are still funded through the tax levy that they request and that council approves. Really, when we talk about financial independence, and that's just a term that was coined for the transition, they are now doing their own accounting internally and not using the town's resources for that. So there will be a system of internal controls that exist up while they were under the town's auspices, and now for the latter half of that, really probably the last quarter of the year, they are now independent and had to come up with their own processes. Our finance staff was helpful in giving them final balances to transition over, And then, of course, they have to get their own accounting rights. So for all intents and purposes, I'm envisioning you have two sets of internal controls and almost like, and then the transition itself over to make sure that they do that correctly, too. That's what we mean by when we talk about financial independence. They're still dependent upon the town for the levying the correct levy on the DIA members and things like that. So they're not financially independent. Sorry if I led you off with that term, but they are financially independent in terms of doing their own accounting going forward.
Yeah, in my mind, that's more of sort of an operational type of independence in terms of they're going to be running their own books and records. So we as auditors will audit all transactions through the year into 2 periods, before the transition and then after. So certainly we'll be documenting effectively 2 sets of processes, the before and after.
Thank you. My third question is just to ask for some clarification. So as you're probably aware, by looking at our financial statements of prior years, we have what we call external investments that we own, bonds, things like that, right? And then we have the internal investment that we have in our government business enterprise, AKA Niagara Power, which then is the holding company of Grimsby Power. And I'm sure you're familiar with that. I don't know if you personally were involved in any way, shape, and form with the audit of those entities in the past. But my question really is a question to do with the accounting rules around that. Do you need to know the market value of the internally owned investment for PSAB purposes?
So with respect to the investment in your government business enterprise, which I'm just going to use the word hydro.
Yes.
The hydro, you record that effectively at cost. So you do not reflect that investment at fair value. And just as a interesting point, the accounting rules that entity follows are actually very different from what you follow as the town. So you follow the public sector accounting standards. The hydro actually follows, we love acronyms, it's called IFRS. But that is based on the basic tenets of historical cost. And that is not reflected at fair value. Those are very 2 different concepts, and in the case of the hydro, very different numbers.
So just to clarify, though, under the PSAB rules, do you need to know the fair market value? Is there a rule similar to the investment rule that says even under the modified equity basis that this needs to be at the lower of fair market value and modified equity? I'm just looking for clarification on that.
You only need to have an understanding of fair value to assess whether or not there is an impairment of that investment. Typically, within the province of Ontario, with municipally owned hydros, in every case that we're involved with, the fair value of the hydros are always significantly in excess as to what they're carried at on your statement of financial position. So it's only to the extent of, do you have an impairment issue?
Related to that, but it really does apply to many other things. So do you review significant contracts that we have, both internally with our GBE, our hydro, or externally? Do you review significant contracts to see if we are offside in any way?
Throughout the audit process, we do look at contracts with, for example, financial institutions, any third parties in which there could be covenants in place, whether they're financial or non-financial, so that we can make the assessment as to whether or not there's any violations. With respect to the transactions between the town and the hydro, one of the important things is to make sure that all of those transactions are appropriately disclosed in your financial statements, and that your financial statements properly and appropriately record the summarized financial statements within your notes to the financial statements. We don't typically look at the individual contracts at the hydro level, We only look at contracts between both organizations that maybe, if there's any shared management services or anything that would impact transactions between the town and the hydro.
Thank you. I think where my concern is coming from is that there is a unanimous shareholder agreement that calls for certain conditions and performance within that. And so I guess my question to you is, will you be familiarizing yourself with it and reporting to this committee if there are some issues of being offside?
Yes, certainly to the extent that there are covenants or areas of compliance that need to be met. If we come across any violations, we will bring that forward. Also, in terms of the hydro, we do consider that to be a component. There is a separate audit done of that component, and we have that component effectively send us some reporting, including whether or not there's any violations of laws or regulations or covenants at that level. If they are, certainly we are required to report that up to you as the town.
And if I could ask one last question, and it's something that I will say we are working on, and that is our WSIB liability. And so not that it was a requirement, but later on in the agenda, we do have a work plan for the committee as to which reports and projects are being worked on and when the reporting will come to us. But currently at this time, we are not yet to the point of being able to know what the WSIB actuarial liability would be for us. We are a Schedule II employer. How do you see that impacting your audit?
Well, certainly for any liabilities, if you have an obligation, whether or not it is easy or hard to nail down, what is that number, anything can be estimated. So, we'll go through and maybe we'll put it at the top of our agenda when we meet again with management. But, if there are obligations, certainly they can be estimated. We will follow the letter of the law in terms of the accounting standards, and if it deems that there is an obligation, then we would, request management to at least provide an estimated, amount using commonly known assumptions. It's kind of consistent with the employee future benefit liability, which is also an estimated number. It's not necessarily easy, but it can be done. So maybe what we'll do is, we'll put that on our parking lot, and then we'll go through that with management to assess, if it's not on your balance sheet, is that correct? If it does belong in our balance sheet, are there ways that you can estimate what is that dollar amount that you should place there, even though it might be an estimate?
So just to expand upon this, so no, the WSIB liability is not on our balance sheet. There is note disclosure in the past, but we don't really know what that liability is, and that liability is changing with the change in rules about what we are now liable for. So we have it on our work plan to have an actuarial calculation done of that. But my concern is more the timing of when we're going to do this, because if that's something that you think you're going to need for the audit, we perhaps need to change the timing of it as to when it will actually be done. Now, it also comes down to whether this amount is material or not. So I'm just sharing that with you so that it can be part of your audit plan, and if we need to do something sooner in order to get you better information, then, let's keep it on the agenda and keep talking about it, right?
Noted, yes.
Any other questions from committee members? And I'm going to say a very big thank you to both gentlemen for coming out tonight. Thank you for sharing that with us. We look forward to speaking with you again, to hearing more from you, and we especially look forward to the audit being done by June of 2025, according to your audit plan, because certainly our staff have been very diligent in trying to, I'll say, get our budget done sooner and sooner. And once that large project is out of the way, that always helps, because then our finance staff can turn their mind to the audit, which then helps that get done sooner and sooner too. So I realize it's a team effort between the audit firm and our finance department especially, but yeah, we look forward to having June reporting if at all possible.
Very good. Also noted. Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a nice evening. Then the resolution is resolved that Finance Report 25-09, the 2024 External Audit Planning Report dated January 23rd, 2025, be received for information. All those in favor, by show of hands, please.
In favor, Leanne.
Thank you. I think we just lost Member Thompson temporarily here, but that motion is carried. The next item on our agenda is still under items 9 on our agenda. And let me take one moment to go back up on my screen. And that is Finance Report 25-02, which is our capital financing policy dated January 23rd. And so I would ask Mr. Delmonico if he would just like to sort of give us a brief overview on that report. And but before you even start that, I need a mover and seconder to get it on the floor for discussion. So that's Member Scandinavo and Member Demare. Would you like to second that motion? Thank you. Okay, that item is on the floor, and Mr. Delmonico, you have the floor now.
Thank you. Yes, so this is a follow-up to the report that was drafted and brought to the committee in October with the draft policy. And just a reminder that the overarching principle of the policy is that we want to move forward with the idea that capital renewal and replacements should be funded from reserves as much as possible to minimize the need for debt in these cases. And doing so would free up debt capacity for growth and strategic investments. And there's a visual that's been included in Appendix B of the report to help illustrate that concept. So the principles of the policy are that growth pays for growth, asset rehabilitation and renewal should be funded from reserves, and debt should be limited to strategic investments. Now, recognizing that long-term asset management funding plans need to be put in place and use of debt may be needed in the interim to fund some high-priority asset rehab projects where reserve funding is not available, so we may need to use debt in some cases there. Now, when it comes to debt, there is a provincial limit which has been set as the maximum. The principal and interest payments made on an annual basis cannot exceed 25% of our own source revenues. The province also provides a risk range which identifies that debt levels in excess of 10% are considered high risk. So for internal purposes, as part of this policy, we've set our internal debt limit to be no more than that 10% of our own source revenues. So to give you some perspective there, currently we're at 1.2%. And that's expected to increase to 3.7 once the debt for the hospital and PKC are factored in. And we are going to be ceasing the debt payments related to Fire Station 2 in 2027. Now, in response to committee feedback from when this was here last time, we've added some wording into the policy around identifying operating impacts of new assets budgeted for, including the impacts on reserve funding. Again, promoting the concept of life cycle cost considerations when approving new asset acquisitions. So if there's any questions or comments at this time.
Are there any questions from committee members? I don't see any. I think that last point that you raised is an especially important one, that when council, before it approves especially a new capital project, not just a replacement. I always say when we get to the point of needing to replace water and sewer lines and roads and so on, by then we usually have significant repair and maintenance costs. And so we know that when we put down a new one, that those costs are going to go down and probably be minimized going forward for quite a number of years. But when we proceed to build new things that we've never had before, it's important that we also assess the operating impact of that before we agree to it, because it might even as in the case of, you know, a PKC doesn't have an impact the day we put the shovel in the ground, but can have an impact down the road after that. And it's important that that be looked at. So I'm really happy to see that provision in there. And it also then gives our finance staff the mandate to ask that of the other departments when they come forward with those things too. And hopefully to help those departments come up with that operational impact too. So that's something really important. I'm glad to see added in there. Any other comments? I see Member Thompson with his hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Through you, I stepped out there for a minute, sorry. I believe some of the questions I had sent through to you, were they sent to the director? And I wasn't sure if they were sent through to the director. Oh, okay. Anyway.
That is a good question. I'm sorry. I can't remember that off the top of my head. Why don't you go ahead?
I think one of the ones I was...
On the capital financing policy
Yes.
we're on now, right? Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Through you, Chair, to the director, you identified that we were going to be looking at 10%, and I had asked for a recommendation that we strive to stay below the lowest, the 5. You've been at 1.2 or going to 3.7, and I was just wondering in policy, why would we go to the high risk or the moderate risk? Why would we not try and strive to stay low? And that was one of my questions.
Yeah, we want to make sure that we give ourselves the flexibility that, you know, we can issue the debt if we need to. There are going to be cases where we're going to have to be issuing debt for asset rehab and replacement. That's kind of counter to the policy until we get to a level in the future when we're at that sustainable level. So we want to make sure we have that debt room to be able to play with. And it's also consistent with some levels that other municipalities have set for their own internal purposes as well.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Anyways, I'm just looking at what your report was showing of 1.2, and we're only going to 3.7 because of the future right now. To get to the 10 is going to be quite significant. So you could make your policy say from time to time, we may have to exceed our 5%. I'm trying to keep our municipality at where you've done a great job, and you're going to continue to do a great job, keep it at that level in policy. But from time to time, if it was in there for an emergency or for some unseen circumstances or approved by council, you can make the wording. I'm just saying I'd love to see it stay below 5, and that's just my recommendation. Thank you.
Member Scandinavo.
Quick question, what actually holds us to the 10%? Because in all reality, the legislation says 25, so we put it in policy, but what actually holds us to stay within that 10%?
Well, I think that's certainly nothing legislatively holds us to that. It is within our own policy. We can change it as we want. But, you know, as we provide updated reports on our debt levels from time to time, we will, you know, use that as our own internal barometer of health of our debt levels. And, you know, again, just want to make sure that we're not restricting ourselves too much either, but making sure that we're not being too, let's say, maybe aggressive or the other way in that we allow ourselves to have too much debt on hand. So
I think, you know, the ultimate answer is that even in this setting, if you think about it, the Finance Committee ultimately makes recommendations about these policies to council to accept the guidelines or to accept the revised policy or whatever, and then council accepts it or doesn't. And then you know, so I hear what Mr. Delmonico is saying. It's really up to council. And if council's in the future said, we don't like that policy anymore, they could direct it to be revised and come up with whatever they wanted. At this point in time, it's just our best advice to the current council that this would be a good limit to stay under. But yes, there is a legislative limit that is much, much higher than what is being recommended. Do the committee members wish to change this policy at this time to be 5% rather than 10? Do I hear any thoughts on that? Much appreciated. Yes, Member Demare.
So I'm just wondering about what's causing that. Is there some sort of projection in the next 3 to 5 years that you expect to see a increasing debt load so that you're expanding this from our small debt load now to going to 3%, 4%, 5%? Now all of a sudden it could be 10%. So is there something that is coming in the future that you're looking at, projections, that there's going to be a fair amount of new projects that are going to increase the debt? Or is this sort of just giving you some comfort room that if something comes along, you're okay? And same with council. So these things sort of coming out of the blue going, okay, you've been this way for a number of years and it's been very good. I mean, the ratio is excellent. But all of a sudden now we're going up here and then going up here and there's no limitation of it. So like the question is, why is there a projection coming forward somewhere that we're expecting to pick up a lot of debt?
Yeah, no, through the chair, I would say that, yeah, we certainly have some big projects on the horizon, like potential Fire Station 3, for example, significant growth-related investments that might require the issuance of debt. When we're talking debt, that includes development charge debt, and sometimes we have to issue the debt before the development actually materializes, so that's certainly a consideration. Through our other previous, reports you've seen here at committee and that have gone to council regarding our asset management reserves, we know that we have a funding gap that needs to be made up and we need to start contributing more to our reserves. The more we do that and the sooner we do that, the less reliant we will be on debt. But until that happens, we may need to be more reliant on debt than we might want to be, which is why I'm thinking we don't reduce it to 5. 10 is plenty, but I'm not saying that we will be exceeding 5 either.
And I will concur that in the budget, which is now public information and will be debated next week, we have a 10-year capital forecast within that budget. And Mr. Delmonico is quite correct that within the next few years, the next major project in front of us, and I only say may be in front of us because that also depends upon some studies and work that we're having done now, but it may be a new or a significantly improved fire station to accommodate the growth that is taking place. So we certainly do not have enough in reserves to pay for that. And I could well imagine that if we took those steps, there would be debt involved in it as well. Member Scandinavo.
Sorry, I'm just trying to think through my question. Without making this overly complicated, and I understand your point, like there's some flexibility like embedded in that 10%. Like I understand the growth, but right now, if it's not there in the plan, right? It's a thought to be in the plan. Would it be more prudent to say, let's lower it to 5, right? Then as needed, we can go to 10. Just thinking of Member Demers' comment there as well. If there's really nothing in the forecast saying it should be at 10, and I understand also your point, Tony, that it's helpful to be flexible, but I'd rather not be flexible on something that's not in the plan, right? Like to cap it so that it's not spent on something that we haven't necessarily thought through as something needed. Anyways, those are just my thoughts. Welcome everyone else's thoughts as well.
Any comments by any other members? Member Demer.
Based on that comment just had, I think, we're talking about scope creep for projects. This is almost debt creep in the sense that I agree the 5% is probably their first spot you should be if you're going to go from 1.7 to the 3 or 4. Okay, keep it at 5 unless something's coming at you that we don't know. But they can always amend the policy if something does come. But if you give them the rope, they'll use it. Thanks.
I think the other thing we need to be aware of, and Councillor
Chair?
Vardy, I'll let you go just after I finish my thought here, is that when we keep debt low, then we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we need to be contributing more to reserves, right? Because as we have these projects coming in front of us, they have to be paid for, right? And so there is a difference in philosophy, I think, when it comes to funding reserves and paying for debt. And I will just explain my thought process on that. So meaning when we are contributing to our reserves, that is taxpayers who live and residents who live in our town today, tomorrow, and so on, right? Who are contributing to that reserve. When we take on debt, it is the taxpayers and residents of the town who are here throughout the term of the debt policy, of the debt, of the debenture itself, who then are helping to pay for it. So we also need to kind of, think about that. And I will share that personally, I support the philosophy of paying it forward, that all those folks who contributed to the reserves in all those years, I and many of us around this table being those people, that we contribute to help and to build up those reserve and try and minimize the debt going forward. And I know I've shared with you the story before about the two households and how they did their projects and how the one then was perpetually in debt. So yes, we also have to kind of take into the consideration, like, who pays for what when, right? These different policies have an impact on that. Councillor Vardy, you have the floor, though. Go ahead.
Thank you. I guess I started out thinking if keep it low, and if we need to raise it, we'll raise it, by just a motion in council. But realizing that we've got a big funding gap for our reserves, I guess my question is, what's the best strategy? Because we don't, in order to meet that funding gap, are we going to have to, raise taxes considerably? So I'm looking to the accountants to tell me what is the best strategy there.
So yeah, if I could elaborate on the strategy presented in the budget is a recommended 1% levy increase to add $178,000 worth of additional contributions to our reserves this year. And then the plan going forward would be to continue to increase that by 1% to 2% per year. In 10 years, we would be doubling our reserve contributions annually, and we would probably reach a sustainable funding level in 20 years at that pace, just to give you some perspective. And of course, the budget would have to be approved each year individually by council, so that's just a long-term plan and what we have for this year's budget.
If I may, I guess I'd hate to see us in a place where we have to keep raising taxes to fund reserves, and we have no money for regular budget, unless we start going into double-digit tax hikes. So, which I think we want to avoid. So, I'm not quite sure the best strategy for this.
Councillor Vardy, I think we probably need to clarify that we're not talking about issuing debt in order to fund operating expenses. We're really talking about a policy here that's being put forward and that I think we all agree on, that, debt is used to fund capital, and not every capital, not capital replacements, but strategic and one-time unique type of capital items. So it's not that we're going to be relying on debt and borrowing money in order to keep the tax levy low. That is not how we're going to be using debt at all. And the second thing to also keep in mind is that we need to build up our reserves to handle the regular capital replacements that we have going forward in front of us. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but, and I don't think I'm the first one to say this, our budget already has proposed this, but that means increased taxes. You can't spend a lifetime ignoring this issue and trying to keep taxes low, and then you finally hit the wall and you don't have enough money to fund these things. I keep saying the last thing we want to have happen to us is that, we have water main breaks, and I'll use the words, City of Calgary bear paw, and I'll, use that term with much trepidation. We never want to be in that spot where we're putting off capital projects and so on and so forth because we don't have enough money in the pot to do it. But we also don't want to be borrowing all the time for this. And we know that we have this conundrum in front of us, just like all the municipalities do across this province and probably across this country. On that, I will stop, though, and Member Scandinavo has his hand up.
Perhaps just like a clarifying question, maybe comment. Like presumably annually, tax rate increases are approved with the budget. And at the same time, if the debt ceiling, let's call it, had to be raised, it could also be discussed, right? So fixing this from 10 to 5 today doesn't mean it's stuck into perpetuity. It just means that, to put it in Member Demers, phrasing, like just you've made that rope a little shorter so it's not so easy to grab, so to speak. So in my opinion, and don't get me wrong, and perhaps I could be wrong procedurally here, but I would say setting this today doesn't set it in stone. It just, adjusts it for now, and then as we go forward, we could look at levies and look at debt ceilings, consistently as years go on, because, things are approved annually.
And I think that's exactly it, is that, perhaps it sets the bar a little lower to start with, but it also means that should we ever start creeping beyond that bar, it means there needs to be a very fulsome discussion about why council is thinking of going over that 5%. And that means some thought and some concern and some deep thinking goes into that process, and that's good. That is all good. So there's no downside probably ever to putting more thought and forethought into some of these things. But Mr. Delmonico, do you have any thoughts on changing this?
Yeah, certainly it's up to the committee, but if you look at page 4 of the report, it's not that difficult to get past that 5% threshold. I think about half the municipalities in Niagara region already passed 5, several at 10 or above. So just keep that in mind. I don't want it to then view down the road as some sort of failure that we have reached that 5% when it was an unrealistic level to begin with.
Councillor Howe.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I think if I can kind of contextualize this, basically if at 5, we've got an alarm bell or a little wake-up call and, say, well, okay, guys, there's a reason that something's looking at you, and you got to be aware of it, and you'd have to kind of construct your thoughts and your plans accordingly. Would it change much? But it just kind of sets off a little bit of an alarm. So I'd be comfortable suggesting that we move it down to 5.
Thank you. I
would agree with that.
Thank you, Councillor Vardy. I'm sorry, I don't always see your hand up on the screen, so thank you for jumping in. I do appreciate that. Please go ahead and continue to do so that we recognize you. I would like to just ask one more question if I could, but Member Demers, please go first.
Thank you, Chair. I just look at, there's more than one lever to pull here. There's taxes, which, it's not the best lever always to pull. But there's other things such as, user fees, which was talked about last meeting, and how we're not at 100%, but we're trying to get there. That's only one lever. The other lever is, of course, reduce expenses and see what we can do to be a little tighter in what we're doing. And so there's multiple levers here to be utilized, and debt is only one of them. So I'm thinking that as we go along, we just got to continue to manage those levers. And I think what I've seen so far in my short time, they're well managed. So I think that's going to be a good situation. And the 5% just gives us some guideposts along that. But levers can change as needs change. But there's more than just one.
Thank you. My second question has to do with, I'll say, page 3 of the report, and it has to do with internal borrowing from town reserves and reserve funds. And I know why we have it in there to consider, because the rules over our development charges reserve funds, and the projections are that we may very well go into what I call the negative on them. And we rely on those a lot, those development charges that we get from developers from that new growth, to help fund the additional pressure that comes to the municipality and then is reflected in the additional capital expenditures that we have to make, the expenditures we have to make in order to meet those pressures. But my concern always is, when we spend more than we have, and really that's what development charges are in that reserve fund. They're a form of savings for us, additional monies that have come in that we've saved. And that if we run those down and below zero, in effect, in order to pay for things, then we have to borrow from the reserves and the other reserve funds, right? Which is sort of what we're contemplating may happen in all of this. And so this policy then gives our finance staff the ability to do so. But again, I think I look at it and I worry a bit that, we're going, and I know other municipalities are now in those same positions where they have money in their development charges reserve funds, and they have spent it all, and they're now, for the accountants in the room, they're in a debit balance rather than in a credit balance on the GL. So they basically spent more than they have taken in, and yet they need to finish these projects or undertake these projects, and so they're borrowing from internally from other sources, basically, in order to fund them. I guess that may be the only way to do it, but I don't know. It just worries me when we start getting into that position. Could you just comment on that, Mr. Delmonico?
Yeah, certainly. It's obviously not the preferred way to do things, but, as you're mentioning, just one of the levers we can pull to try to avoid having to go out for external debt in those cases where the funds aren't available immediately. But yeah, certainly a key component of the development charges and the concept is to make sure that the development will materialize and the fees collected to pay for that, for the debt that's happening.
Any comments from members? Are you comfortable with that? Do you understand what that means? A question from that side of the table? Okay, then I'm going to ask that we now vote on this, but we have changed the policy a bit, so I'm just going to incorporate that into there. Do you have a question on that?
No, Chair, I wasn't. I was waiting for that to finish because I'm sorry to the director. The few questions I had asked through email, I guess, never reached you, Director. I'm sorry. I did have a couple other questions because I read the policy over, and it was basically, I guess I can ask the Chair, through you, Chair. Let me ask, how does council know when a capital project's closed? We depend on our director to tell us, or through a reporting system. Well, the policy really doesn't identify about any reporting, but it also could highlight, I was just wondering, if you have something in there, a criteria on closing out capital projects. Because sometimes we found out through COVID, a project's going on 3-4 years, and you guys may cancel it. So should not a policy have a criteria to close out capital projects? Just curious.
I will let Mr. Delmonico add to that, but we do get reports from our finance department all the time about capital projects, carry forwards and so on, and even within our budget, there are those reports again, with details of dollars and so on, and I don't know that it goes into quite the depth of that you may be thinking, but I will let Mr. Delmonico add to that.
Yeah, so through the quarterly variance reporting that we bring here, we identify the number of projects that are open, the number of projects that have started versus completed. Those would be the avenues where you would get the updates on the projects if there's any debt related to them.
I think what the member's really asking is that, should we build that into the policy, that there be regular reporting of that? It's good practice and we're doing it now, but I'm just thinking, what if, knock on wood, what if we had a different treasurer who didn't realize that that's what they need to be doing? Is it something that we should build into the policy to make sure it's never forgotten? Member Thompson.
Through you, Chair, just to make it simple then, I think just under the responsibilities of the Finance Department, one liner, he can make it very simple that in his quarterly, which the director's always done, just have it in there because it's your policy and you have to know when he provides statements or something. But I don't see anything about the responsibilities of the Finance Department reporting. And if you just put one liner in there, I think that would solve the whole issue of, because you do get them. And I have seen them and you have seen them.
So just to clarify, we're talking about page 4 on my screen, 6.0, responsibilities, and we're talking about subparagraph C, the responsibilities of the Finance Department. And we have a small 1 to 4 there. Starts off with to transparently consolidate, present budget considerations to direct staff on strategy, to recalculate the annual repayment limit, and to manage the administration of the debenture issuances. And is that what you're referring to, that we could create a small letter 5, and it could say something along the lines to report on the progress of capital projects? That way nothing is left for granted or just assumed, it's in writing there. Any comments on that?
No, that's duly noted. I think it's a good idea.
Go ahead.
Sorry. And just one other minor one, and I'll go through you, Director. D, there's 6D, the responsibility of project managers. Is project managers the town staff? Or is that an entity, like at the arena, a project manager that's outside that's going to be reporting?
Through the chair, that refers to town staff.
Then my recommendation is that you ensure, it just says responsibility of the town staff or project manager in charge of the project. Just the project manager could be identified as an entity outside like we have ongoing right now. That's what my concern would be. It's a policy, that's all.
Yes, we could just clarify that and say the responsibilities of even
Town
staff project managers?
Yeah, town staff managing
Yeah.
project, something. I was just, sorry, that's my OG, I'm sorry.
You're in good company here with all the OCD.
We could add that, just like in brackets, town staff, make sure we know who we're referring to.
Okay, so the proposed changes are that on that same page, they're all on that same page, page 4, at the top of the page after the chart, it will say to ensure that the town stays within the low-risk category, the town's annual internal repayment limit shall be targeted to be, and in this case, under 5%. And then under 6C, we'll have a new little 5 that deals with the reporting of the capital projects. And under 6.0D, that first line, the responsibilities of project managers, and there'll be something in brackets to refer to internal staff. So we have 3 changes with that. So based upon that, I'm going to read the resolution. Resolve that report Finance 25-02, the capital financing policy dated January 23rd, 2025 be received, and that the capital financing policy attached as Appendix A to this report and as amended for those 3 items be approved. I'm just going to give our clerk 1 second there to make sure that that he catches and writes down the resolution, or that we amend my wording if need be. Okay, so the clerk has advised me that we need to vote on each of those individually. Would you like to give us the wording for the first one? I'll ask the clerk to read out the first resolution that we will be voting on. Do we need a mover and a seconder for it too then? Yes, okay. So I'll let you read it and then we'll go from there.
Resolve that the capital financing policy be amended to set the town of Grimsby's internal debt servicing repayment limit at 5% of operating revenue.
So I'm going to say the low category, this says for under 5%, just to be really specific.
There we go.
Read it again.
There we go. Resolve that the capital financing policy be amended to set the town of Grimsby's internal debt servicing repayment limit below 5% of operating revenue.
Mr. Delmonico, does that sound right? Okay. Then if I could have a mover and a seconder for that. Moved by Member
I'll move it.
Scandinava. And
I'll
Councillor
second it.
Vardy will second it. Thank you. And by a show of hands, all those in favor, please.
In
And
favor?
thank you, Councillor Vardy. That is passed. The second resolution, then, I'll ask the clerk to read it.
Resolve that the capital financing policy be amended to include that an additional responsibility of the finance department to report regularly to the finance committee on capital projects.
If I could have a mover and a seconder for that. Member Thompson, Councillor Howe has seconded that. And all those in favor, by show of hands, please. Councillor Vardy?
Yes.
Thank you. That is carried. And the last resolution, or the last amendment,
Resolve that the capital financing policy be amended to include, in brackets, town staff, after the responsibilities of project managers in 6.0D of the policy.
Yes, Ferdinand.
okay, Councillor Vardy is moving that. The seconder is Member Thompson. And all those in favor, by show of hands, please. Councillor Vardy, I assume seeing you moved it,
Yes.
you also? Thank you, that is carried. And the last resolution, then, we'll go back to the full sum of the resolution. So resolve that report Finance 25-02 Capital Financing Policy dated January 23rd, 2025 be received, and that the capital financing policy attached as Appendix A to this report and as amended be approved. By show of hands, all those in favor, please. Councillor Vardy?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. That is carried. The next item on our agenda is our procurement bylaw update. And that is item 9.2, Finance Report 25-03. If I could have a mover and seconder to get it on the floor, please. Councillor Korsanji has moved that. Councillor Howe has his hand up to second that. And so over to you, Mr. Delmonico.
Thank you. So this policy is being brought forward for regular review. It was last approved in 2021. There's no major changes being proposed. All the thresholds determining the type of procurement remain the same. We have added wording in Section 28 around prioritizing the purchase of hybrid vehicles where operationally feasible. This was a result of a committee motion from last year. We've added a section on unsolicited proposals. That's Section 29, which states that we cannot accept unsolicited proposals without going through the normal procurement process. The exempt list in Schedule A has been modified. Under the first section, we added some details to what was referred to as miscellaneous. It was a bit vague, so it could lead to broadly interpreted. So we've added some reference to our collective workplace agreements and employee expense reimbursement policy. Other changes to that section are postal services and utilities, which have been added. And then Schedule B, the authority has been changed for contract execution from director to manager. That's for small dollar direct-to-market purchases, and that was just done for expediency and efficiency. And we've also tried to outline and simplify the designate roles for who has authorization under Schedule B. So those are the extent of the changes, and we're currently having the bylaw reviewed by legal. So we'll bring it back to committee once that's happened for approval. So really it's just here for information. Thank you.
So to our committee members this evening, do you have any questions or any amendments that you would like to see on your reading of this? Member Thompson.
Yes, through you, Chair. I had put it in the email, was consideration, I don't even know if it's legal, and I'm looking for the expertise here. Due to our political environment and nature we're seeing across the world, is there anything in the supplier's performance that you can possibly eliminate a supplier who will not supply made in Canada goods and materials, if possible?
So through the chair, I know there's certain trade agreements we have to adhere to, international and even intra-province, interprovincial. That is something that we'll have since we're going for the legal opinion, I just want to get the legal, what we can legally and what we can and can't legally do.
Sounds good. Any other questions? Councillor Howe?
Through you, Chair, it's really not a question, but there were many years ago, we used to be able to say, we're going to buy a truck, but you only bought it out of Grimsby. You know, you didn't go out of, then I think it was somebody out of Mississauga, kind of changed the world a little bit and had to be a little bit more, not transparent because it was staying internal. Everybody knew what we're paying, but we had to go to the lowest bidder, even though it was $5. But that's how much times have changed, you know, as to now you gotta, with your computer, you end up going all over the world and people can quote on and whatnot. But anyways, I'm blabbing. But it was a different world for sure. Probably a lot more straightforward too. With the procurement policy, and this is kind of out of left field, is there a short form of the procurement policy? Because this is standard, I think, to municipalities. But there is just so much excess in there and so many I's dotted and T's crossed, backside covering all the way through it. Is there a short form, or do they ever talk about coming up with something that can be understood by a somewhat sane individual.
Yeah, through the chair, I know I can understand it can be a bit much sometimes. I think the important part is the schedule, where is it here? The Schedule A, I believe it is, where it outlines the procurement, Schedule B, the contract award and execution and payment release authority. It also outlines the procurement methods, whether that can be direct or if we need quotes or if we need a formal competition to take place. So I think that's kind of the main page if you want to focus on one page. But, again, the whole point of the procurement bylaw is to ensure that, we're procuring for the best value and in the most transparent way, so we can have confidence of the public and that we're doing it in their best interest.
Just a question to Councillor Howe, who you had mentioned something before the meeting about hybrid vehicles, but also hybrid equipment. Yeah, go.
Director referred to the environmental as to vehicles, and it should be and/or equipment. So vehicles and/or equipment are going to be need to be looked at in that same kind of a lens. So.
Just a question to Mr. Delmonico, and then I'll recognize Member Thompson, who had his hand up. But if we're going to add that into the procurement policy, we're going to have to just note it for the clerk as an amendment to it. Could you just direct us to which page and which line? And while you're looking that up, I'll give Councillor Howe a chance to finish his thoughts.
I believe this is a draft and it's going to be coming back to us because it's been reviewed. That can just be, I would think, just had it in. We don't need to go through all the rigmarole.
Sounds good. Yes, we could do it that way for sure.
I would agree. It's referring to section 28 where we talk about acquiring vehicles. We'll just add in vehicles and equipment.
Okay. Member Thompson had his hand up first, and then Member Scandinavo.
Yes, it's something I just noticed through you, Chair, to the Director. The library operates under its own procurement, I believe. Is that not maintained by the town staff, like for when they, and then the procurements? I didn't know this. This is something new. Why is that?
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, the library has their own procurement policy that's governed by their own board. Yeah.
Member Scandinavo.
Just a quick question in regards to Schedule B. If I'm not mistaken, like BPSA thresholds have increased from 100 to 121,000, if I'm not mistaken, for open competition. I'm just curious, why did we choose to leave it at 100? Not that I'm not that I'm necessarily pushing to increase it, but I'm just curious because open competition requires, like, it's quite a heavy lift and could take significant amount of time. It's not as simple as, an invitational competition or an informal quote process. Like, an open competition requires, posting it, leaving it up for a certain amount of time, having a scoring committee, yada, yada, yada. So obviously the province has increased it, as a result of simple inflation over the last number of years. And again, not that I'm pushing to change it to match the province's increased threshold, but just out of curiosity, was that considered or?
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, it was considered. We did a scan of other procurement policies for other similar sized municipalities, others in the region. I was actually a bit surprised myself to see that it hadn't changed given the levels of inflation, not just the past few years, but a lot of these are at the same levels they were in like 2000, 2001. So that is still pretty consistent with what we're seeing in the other municipalities. So that's why we decided to leave it.
If I could just interject and ask a question related to that, then how many RFPs have we issued in the past that were over 100,000? And is that number increasing? Are we seeing any trends? and maybe you can't answer that question because you might not know the answer, it sort of surprised you with it here, but maybe that's just something to think about before we come back to the next meeting with the final of that.
Yeah, we're actually bringing a report next month on the procurements that were issued the last 6 months, so that'll give us a good idea of what we're dealing with and the thresholds there.
Because maybe we'll find that because of this limit, we're having to go out to issue RFPs more and more and more and more, and maybe it is time then to think about that, right? Member Scandinavo, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say it might end up costing you more to have the threshold lower due to the investment of time and energy to review something that, like to your point, if these thresholds were set 20 years ago, $100,000 20 years ago is nowhere near what $100,000 is worth today. And again, not that we should increase it arbitrarily, but we should, if the province does allow it and we look at the statistics, maybe it is something we consider. So.
And that, in effect, is about being efficient, too. That it takes a lot of staff time to issue these and go through that whole process. So I guess what we're really saying to our director is that we are open to a little more research, and we're probably open to reconsideration here. Any other committee comments before we finalize this? I don't see any then. So at this point in time, resolve that report Finance 25-03 on the procurement bylaw update dated January 23rd, 2025 be received. And so you'll notice those words be received because on an informal basis, it will we'll be waiting for a legal opinion and a few of the changes that have been proposed. It will come back to the committee next month. So by show of hands, all those in favor, please. Councillor Vardy?
Yes.
Thank you. That is carried. The next item on our agenda is our 2025 Finance Committee Work Plan. And we're now talking about item on the agenda 9.3. Everyone hopefully has had an opportunity to look at that. Any comments on it? I'm going to ask Mr. Delmonico first to just walk us through that at a high level, and then I will take comments or questions.
Do we need a mover and seconder?
We do. Thank you for reminding me of that. So in order to get that on the floor, I need a mover and seconder. If I could have that, Councillor Kristangi and Member Demare. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Delmonico.
Thank you. Yeah, as mentioned, this report contains a plan for what's coming to committee and when. So just here for first review, for an opportunity to discuss and provide feedback, and we'll bring it back again next month with updates. So this is a plan, so just bear in mind we'll need to be flexible and recognize the plan may change depending on circumstances as the year progresses, but we've tried to spread things out as best possible in consideration of time involved in preparing reports as well as staff time involved in performing other tasks and duties. And so we've scheduled, as you'll see, we have meetings each month except for July and December, and we have some substantial time-intensive projects planned this year, including the development charge bylaw review, as well as the water wastewater modernization project. The plan also includes some legislatively required reporting, such as annual portfolio investment report, development charge reserve fund status report, building permit fees report. Those are some examples. So looks like it's going to be another packed year, and we'll open any comments or questions you might have.
Committee members, Member Scandinavo.
I just want to say, when we started this finance committee about 18 months ago, this was like, something we spoke about and suggested, and, it really has come together nicely, and I want to commend you guys for putting this together and taking the time and effort. Like, we realize that, as you said very well, that, you're balancing, regular tasks with preparing reports for this committee and council, and that is challenging. So I really, really, really want to thank you for taking the time and effort of putting this together. It lays out a clear plan, and as you said, yes, plans are flexible, but it does give us like a vision for the, next 12 months, so we have an idea of what to expect. And honestly, this is great. We've come a long way in the last 18 months, and, thank you very much for that, Tony.
Thank you, for sure, especially to our staff for taking the time to lay out the next coming year for us. And for Just to note for folks that on the schedule is also the evaluation of the WSIB funding needs. That's on our work plan on page 2. We have it under May, unless our auditors feel differently about it. We'll get some input from them. Mr. Delmonico, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so we do a actuarial evaluation every 3 years, and that includes the WSIB along with the post-employment benefits. It sometimes gets lost among the post-employment benefits because it's so small in relation. So for audit purposes, we'll be fine, but I think we wanted to look at that for more of a practical rather than reporting in terms of what would be a good sort of reserve target to get to fund those obligations.
Thank you. Councillor Howe?
Through you, Chair. And Director, I'm happy to see it noted on here that we're going to be developing some KPIs to reference it. That's a first for us, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to try to address that and see how we stand compared to others and see where we might need to improve.
In fact, we got into this a little bit in our preliminary budget deliberations as well, in that, and members Scandinavo can probably speak to this way better than I can, but in the healthcare field, the funding from the Ministry of Health for hospital operations per se is much more geared to how they do with their KPIs, comparing to other hospitals of comparable size. And I said, given the gap in that we have came about from the asset management study, and of course the pleas that all municipalities are now making to the province, I could, without putting words into the province, I could totally see them coming back saying, well, how much does it cost you to replace that water main or that road? And, well, you're way out of line compared to, other municipalities of your size. So, get back in that fence, and the fence is only this size, right? And so those KPIs, I think, are going to be really important, not just on the finance side, but in other areas of the work that we do, whether it be public works or in our recreation services or whatever. It's going to be, I think, the coming trend, and it's an old trend in the hospital field. That type of funding has been around for a few decades now, I'm going to say. But it's also a different field where they're funding healthcare, and in the case of municipalities, they're not funding us near to that extent. So we are talking kind of apples and oranges, but I can see how they might pick up on an idea they have in another ministry and start applying it to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and municipalities. I don't know, Member Scandinavo, if you could add anything to that in your experience.
I think you did a very good job explaining it, so nothing further.
He must be Irish. Then on that note, if there are no further comments, suggestions, or anything related to that, then resolve that report Finance 25-04, the 2025 Finance Committee Work Plan dated January 23rd, 2025 be received. With a show of hands, all those in favor, please.
Yes, for
Councillor.
Leanne.
Thank you, Councillor Vardy. That is carried. The next item up for discussion is our 2024 third quarter financial update. If I could have a mover and seconder to get it on the floor, please. Member Scandinavo and Member Demare. Okay, and Mr. Delmonico, I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you. So this report, it's a bit out of date. It was originally planned for the November Finance Committee meeting, and we've not updated the report, but we will be bringing a final variance report back to committee in a couple months' time. So we're projecting a surplus on the property tax supported areas of about 500,000. That's primarily due to gapping related to staff vacancies. Another big factor is the dividend received from Niagara Power of 180,000, which is not budgeted for. And the building department revenues were trending higher than expected for the year. In that case, however, any surplus in the building department operations would go back to their building department reserves. And there's nothing substantial that I'm aware of to report on that would affect that estimate as of the time of writing. The report shows $2 million projected deficit related to wastewater. That's mainly driven by a $1.2 million reconciliation in our actual versus budgeted wastewater flows treated by the region. Each year, the region sends us a true up to either reimburse us or charge us for any difference in the actual versus budgeted flows coming into their treatment plant. And the region recently notified us of a wastewater flow meter calibration error. The end result is that our past wastewater flows have been underreported. So this impacts the variance because our share of the region's budget is based on the past 3-year average of flows in comparison to the rest of the local area municipalities. So this error has artificially reduced our budgeted flows while the error persisted, and each year-end a reconciliation, like I mentioned, is done to true that up to the actuals. So now that the actuals have been adjusted for, it's resulting in our reconciliation being quite high. We had assumed 1.2 million at the time of writing. The final has come in at 1.6, so it's actually a little bit higher than that. There's also another factor that's at play that could also be leading to the higher reconciliation variance related to inflow and infiltration, which is likely playing a factor. What that is we may be experiencing higher groundwater and stormwater inflow and infiltration into our sewage system, higher than the other area municipalities for some reason. And this may be caused when groundwater or rainwater enters the wastewater pipes via cracked pipes, for example, underground, pipes that may be in need of repair, or perhaps roof leaders that are connected directly to the sewage system. So what happens is that results in unnecessary higher flows that get sent to the treatment plant to be treated. And to help mitigate that, we have a capital project in the budget to identify and address problem areas related to potential inflow and infiltration. So I'd expect that now that the calibration error has been identified and corrected for, that our annual reconciliation for the 2025 year end should not be as significant as we're seeing this year. If it is, that would indicate to me that we do in fact have inflow and infiltration problems and that are persisting. So again, we'll be bringing the final Q4 variance report to committee in March, and we'll see where we land. Thank you.
Questions from committee members? Member Scandinavo.
Out of curiosity, like if there's a reconciliation issue with the region that's, not necessarily just a pure reconciliation, but seems to be an error in calibration, is there any way to push back on that? Like presumably the region has its own reserves. Like, I mean, unless I've misunderstood, it looks like this additional charge is as a result of a calibration issue discovered upon reconciliation. And it's significant, right? So is there a way to push back and say, maybe not eat the whole cost, but let's share in the error, so to speak?
I have raised that with them. I think the problem there that is the fact that it's basically in essence, they've been undercharging us. So it's an attempt to kind of catch that up now. And if it was to kind of persist and continue, it would be continuing to undercharge us at the expense of the other area municipalities.
Any questions or comments from the committee? Go ahead.
Sorry, just to add on, I totally understand exactly what you're saying, but and I'm not necessarily insinuating that other areas pay for this, but I'm thinking about it logically. If your gas bill was wrong for 4 years and then they realized it, does Enbridge have the right to knock on your door and say, you owe me this amount of money? At what point in time does the entity that's responsible for billing owe or have an obligation to ensure the accuracy of the billing? And then what sort of, maybe for lack of better terms, the statute of limitations to say I can't go back and try to adjust an error from 6 years ago, right? Because it's obviously impacting us today. Again, not at the expense of other municipalities, but presumably the region has some reserves that they could use up on this. And additionally, maybe even split the cost, because it seems to be significant, right? I mean, I can't remember what the change in, or what the reconciliation process was last year, if it resulted in a surplus or deficit or whatever the case may be for us, but this, if in the report, you're saying a forecasted deficit of 1.6, but in reality, since the time of writing to today, it's gone to 1.6. I mean, that's significant in my opinion, but just, how do we like approach them, or maybe we can't?
Yeah, I think you'll see in the report, there are years where we've had some significant rebates. It does go both ways. The region is looking at it with the area municipalities, see if there's a better way to do this to avoid these large swings. So there are discussions taking place to see if to come up with a better alternative to doing this.
And if I understand this, the sewage treatment plant is within the town of Grimsby, its location, as we all know, near Baker Road. And so there are meters, because sewage comes through from Lincoln, from the town of Lincoln, then joins with the town of Grimsby, it makes its way to the sewage treatment plant. And so it's that meter that was metering what was coming from the town of Lincoln, which means we were underbilled, but they were overbilled, because the meter was calibrated incorrectly. And so I'm not disputing your point. I fully support your comment there on pushing back a bit. But there is, for what we pay extra, it'll be places like the town of Lincoln, or perhaps West Lincoln, or whoever else is impacted by this calibration meter, that will get a refund actually as well. So there is a two-sided effect of this error taking place, right? And I totally agree with you. In essence, the region is coming out of this and being held blameless, and yet it was their contractors who calibrated this incorrectly. And so there's a bit of a fairness issue here, I guess, or about taking responsibility for the fact that these were their contractors who did this, not ours. Any other comments from committee members? Member Demare.
I just wanted to talk about the fire protection services. That's another issue regarding WSIB claims. So in a sense, we're getting caught with some unanticipated claims that claims costs, I assume, that increase in our premiums, or is this unfunded liability that we need to deal with? Is this one shot, or is this a continuing situation that's going to grow as opposed to one-off?
Go ahead, Mr. Delmonico.
Yeah, so to give some background on the WSIB, like the chair mentioned earlier, we're a Schedule II employer, which means we self-fund our claims. So as claims arise, it's up to us to pay for them. We don't pay premiums to WSIB to take care of that. So right now, we don't have any reserves or budget in place for that. It just basically comes out of our surplus if we have it, or would be funded from our stabilization reserve if need be. So that's what we want to do, that study, to kind of see if we can come up with an estimate of what would be a reasonable amount to start setting aside to have in a reserve or as a budget, so we can pay for those claims, because we do self-fund them. And so I think what's happened in the previous years, we haven't really had these claims. Now we're seeing them a little more. And, they tend to be unpredictable in nature. So it'd be, I think, in our best interest to start building up a bit of a reserve or budget to have, so we can start to pay these if, as they come up and if needed.
And I think just to answer the other part of your question, so the amounts we're having to come up with after WSIB does its final ruling on it have included some retroactivity, obviously, because there's a time process to all of this. But then there is the ongoing cost going forward as well to continue that also needs to be taken into account. So you're quite right. It's not that someone is heard and then the next day they quantify. inevitably there's some retro involved, and then there is also the prospective cost going forward too. But go ahead, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. Just so if it's, like I'm thinking, it's a situation that may be increasing in the sense that it's not just one or two claims, but is there something going on that's going to increase these type of claims coming at us, and then we have to reserve for them? So we're working with WSIB in the sense they're saying, okay, this is the cost, right? So they're trying to educate it as well, but what's coming out of that? What's the situation that's causing these claims? So do we something risk management aspect of this situation? Because, okay, one time you're doing one thing, but now all of a sudden maybe it's something's occurring that's happening and it's going to grow, and we need to have some sort of risk management aspect around that.
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah, I mean, some of this relates to claims that are being settled and will end, and some relate to claims that are going to be continuing and ongoing. So, and then there's always the risk of other claims that pop up, and the legislation has been changing, especially for firefighters. What's called presumptive legislation, or if a firefighter, for example, develops cancer, it's presumed that it's job related. So there's some risks, I think, that are increasing for us that I think we just want to make sure that we're cover ourselves as much as possible.
And I think I will add to that just something that our deputy chief and our fire chief have shared with our fire committee. And one of the things that's in our budget, in our capital budget, is the ongoing replacement and acquiring second, I'll call them, I'm not going to use the right term, so Member Thompson, I'm sure will know the right term, but basically a second set of equipment that they wear, jackets, pants, and so on, and that it's important that be there so they can change out of it. And because if it's a fire that takes a long time, by putting on clean equipment that is not contaminated further, that helps. So they're doing that, and that's within the budget. The other item that came up was the province has given out some grants for, and I'm going to use the wrong words again, I call it for washing this equipment. Fire washing equipment is kind of how I describe it to myself. I'm sure it has a much more proper name. But that will be installed at each of the fire stations. So the grant was per fire station. And so we've received approval of those grants, I believe. And so that equipment will be purchased and put in place there as well to just to mitigate and minimize the risk going forward too. Those are small things because, yeah, when you're fighting these fires, as Member Thompson could describe to us in great detail, there are carcinogens involved in these things, and they affect our staff. Any further questions on the third quarter financial update? Then I will read the resolution that says, resolved that Finance Report FIN 25-05, the 2024 third quarter financial update dated January 23rd, 2025 be received. Show of hands, those in favor?
In favor, Leanne.
Thank you. That is carried. We're now moving on to item 9.5, Finance Report 25-06. If I could have a mover and seconder to get that on the floor, please. Member Scandinavo and Member Demare has seconded that. Mr. Delmonico, would you like to walk us through that report?
Thank you. So this report's before you. We require a budget enhancement for this project. It's the situation here is that it was put out for tender a couple of years ago, and the project moved forward as if the budget and scope of work was higher than what was actually approved and budgeted for. When the tender was put out, it asked vendors to bid on a base as well as provisional items, and what happened was work went forward as if the provisional items were included in the budget, but they were not. So this now leaves us in a position where we're over budget by $175,000. I think part of the problem was the way we were budgeting in the past, which we're not doing anymore now, is multi-year projects used to be closed and reapproved each year. Sometimes, as in this case, additional budget asks were made as work and design progressed, and this seems to have led to confusion as to what the total budget was at the time. Again, we don't budget like this anymore. Projects are now carried forward from year to year. If additional budget is needed, then that additional ask is considered for approval. Another factor seemed to be staff turnover. When we looked into it, there were many different staff involved in this project, and losing history along the way, I think, played a big factor, and that just kind of highlights the importance of maintaining staff stability as well.
Questions or comments by committee members? Then I will, Councillor Howe.
I was, through you, Chair. What is this work entailing? What do we need to finish off down there? And in fairness to the director, Tony, I don't know if you're aware, and I don't think that Director Sweeney is about, I don't see any sign of on there. I suspect I should have asked that question previously, but, we've got 175 going, but what needed to be done or what wasn't done, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, through the chair, it's not that anything needs to be done. The project is now finished. It's just that we don't have the budget there. It was overspent. So those provisional items ended up going through. They were tendered as provisional in the event that they were to be needed, but it was, it went through that way.
Mr. Delmonico, do we know what those provisional items were? I mean, they were quoted on separately and then obviously billed. Do you have some parameters, or can you describe sort of the specifics of them?
If you give me a second, I'll see if I can find that. Yeah, I could get back to the committee on that. I don't have it in front of me, but basically what provisional items are, it's common to have them priced out as part of these RFPs. It's common practice. It's the benefit is that if something does come up or needs to be altered once the project started, we have the benefit of a set price in place, right? So that it's asking for provisional items is not uncommon. It's just the fact that what was included in the scope of work didn't match the budget.
Councillor Howe.
And the one observation is that the 175 is going to be covered out of existing reserves and parkland and recreation based reserves, the way I read it, so.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, I have to wonder, we still have never seen, I don't think, the labor increase requirement for Casablanca Park either. And that doesn't seem to be noted, but anyway, thank you.
Member Demare.
Sorry for my unknowing about this, but I see there's a 11.6 million. The overall budget reserve balance, and then there's $175,000. But again, is that basically money that's come from different government sources? So we've tapped into reserves of a gold mine nature that are significant, and it's 4.3. So what was the balance going to after it's all said and done? Does this go anywhere, or is that just stops the money that, okay, you're offered 11.6, but you only use 4.3, so the rest of it disappears, or does it go somewhere else?
Can I just ask you what page of the report you're referring to? I'm looking at page 3. Is that the?
Page 3.
And so that chart at the top is a continuity schedule of the reserve balance, not of the project cost, of the reserve balance, yeah.
So there was a reserve, that reserve came from
Over the years, monies came about that were set aside into this reserve fund. And those sources primarily, well, one of the sources, as an example, is the second line, development charges. And then there was also money that came to us from a federal program, the Canada Community Building Fund. And then the Parkland Dedication Reserve, which I think comes to us from monies through development agreements that we have with developers. So over the years, that's where the balance now stands at 11.6 million. And then as you read over to the right, you see the continuity of what's going to be used and where it's going to end after we decide tonight. Am I describing it the right way, Mr. DeMonico?
So I'm just trying to clarify that the actual the building fund is a grant from the government,
That was, yes.
and the rest of it is just money that we put into it over the years in the reserve buildup,
Yes, yeah.
so that you have a grant of $5.8 million. So if you're even now going to be at 4.5, you're well covered by that grant, and not touching the reserves.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. That now tells me that this is a funding from the Canadian government to help us with this park, rather than into a reserve, or we have other needs for that reserve.
Well, and I think the initial thinking was that it was going to have to come out of reserves, but now they've relooked at the terms of the grant and so on, and feel that it may qualify for that, and so it's going to come out of those monies that were given to us. Is that a good description of it?
Through the chair, yeah, that's correct. Yeah, you'll see the project budget was 4.3 million. And then the reserve balance, you'll see the opening at 11.6 and the ending 11.4 once we make these adjustments.
If there are no further questions, then I'm going to call the vote. So this resolve that report finance 25-06, the Casablanca Beach Park Development Phases 1 to 3 budget amendment dated January 23rd, 2025 be received, and that one, that council approves additional funding of $175,000 for the completion of the Casablanca Beach Park project Phases 1 to 3 for a total project cost of $4,516,060, and two, that the project funding allocations be amended as recommended within that report. All those in favor by a show of hands, please. In favor? Councillor Vardy, thank you. That motion is carried.
Apart from taking the draw. And I ended up drawing.
Councillor Vardy, if we could just ask you to silence. Thank you. Then we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item number 9.6, Finance Report 25-07, having to do with the Peach King Center. And as the committee is aware, we get regular updates on this. So in order to get that on the floor, if I could have a mover and seconder, please. Councillor Korsanji has moved that. Councillor Howe has seconded that. And Mr. Delmonico.
Thank you. Yeah, so regarding this project, we're still looking good. We're projecting a small overall positive variance. We've used 472,000 of the contingency so far, or just under 20% of our contingency, and construction progress is at 25% completion. So we feel we're at a good level in terms of contingency usage, given where we're at in this stage of the project. We realize the contingency is there for a reason. It's to cover unforeseen issues, so we are anticipating that we will continue to see some more unforeseen things pop up. But the fact that we've used relatively low, given the progress of the project, is a good sign.
Any questions? Councillor Howe?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Director, on the page 2 of the report, the change orders, now it's designed, but we got 796. Is a chunk of that drain that was supposed to have been there and wasn't there? And
Yeah, I think you're referring to the drainage in the parking lot and the stormwater management issues. Yeah, I believe about half of that relates to that stormwater.
Any other questions from committee members? I see none. So I'll call the question. Resolve that Report Finance 25-07, Peach King Center Expansion, January 2025 update, dated January 23rd, 2025, be received. Show of hands for approving that, please. And Councillor Vardy?
Approved.
Thank you. That motion is carried. The next item on our agenda, pardon me, is item 9.7, Finance Report 25-08, which has to do with our 2024 tax arrears update. If I could have a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor, please. Councillor Corstangi, Member Thompson, and Mr. Delmonico, I will let you take it from there. I always call this the canary in the coal mine report, so go right ahead.
Thank you once again. So our tax arrears are up a little bit from last year. We're at 5.4% versus 4.3%. It's still in the low risk category and still below our past 5-year average. We suspect that the mail strike may have played a part with this increase, and that people weren't getting their overdue reminder notices in a timely manner as they're used to. We're also still below the regional average, which is around 7%. Just to summarize, we have total properties in arrears of just over 1,400 with arrears value of $4 million, and that's out of 75 million because that includes the region and education taxes owing as well. So most, 90% are under 1 year overdue. 10% are 2 years or less, and then we have 5 properties that are 3 years or more overdue. As for the amounts owing, we have 779 owing less than 1,000. That's over 50% that owe less than 1,000. 30% owe between 1 and 2,000, and 15% owe more than 5,000. And just to update the committee, so far in 2025, we've received over 400,000 in payments related to arrears. So that would bring our arrears balance down to 3.6 million and would drop our percentage down to only 4.8, which would be closer in line with last year's figure. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Councillor Howe?
Through you, Chair. Director, do you think that with what has shown up now covers off what would have come if there hadn't been a mail strike?
There we go. Sorry. Through the chair, yeah, I think that's fair to say. Yeah, that's probably, we know there's going to be an impact there. I know a lot of people do tend to rely on their notices to trigger for when they pay. So I think that's a fair comment.
Can I just ask you to walk us through the chronology of this? So the last payment was due at the beginning of October, I don't know, October 3rd, 4th, somewhere in there, right? And then do you wait till the end of the month and then run an arrears report, and then notices go out after that? So they would have been going out, I'll say, perhaps in the first half of November, and then by then we were caught into a strike shortly thereafter. So do you think the notices actually ended up stuck in the mail? Is that kind of stuck in the strike?
Yeah, through the chair, I don't have the exact dates here, but yeah, what would happen is, we ensured we mailed out the due dates. We got those hand delivered, but what ended up getting delayed was the reminder notices for people from earlier in the year that had missed their timelines. They would have been mailed out during the time of that strike as well. So they're probably just getting them now. Maybe they got them earlier in January, realizing, oh, I'm behind, I better make my payment. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I think we have a manager of Revenue and Collections, Lisa Martin, on the line that might be able to elaborate a bit more on some of the dates that you were referring to.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Thanks for coming online. Would you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that we did get out notices throughout the year. We send notices out per our tax policy over $200. They go out after the due dates, and the final notice of the year goes out in November. So technically, I'm trying to recall back to the date, but it was delayed because of the mail strike. So a lot of people rely on those last final reminders to tell them they're in a position now with the tax sale registration timelines. Any part of 2 years or greater will make you eligible. So we do have a lot of repeaters who will wait for that last notice to get in touch with us to get themselves out of a position. So we are seeing a lot of activity in that direction right now as a result of the mail delay. I also wanted to highlight we did have a nice positive increase in our PAMP enrollment as a result of the postal strike. A lot of people reached out to get on plans to help them manage their taxes, which is a good note for us. So we have a good portion of properties on payment plans as a result, and we're seeing some secured collection as a result of that, which is always nice to have on a monthly basis.
Then just a question related to the timing still of these. So there was a due date. Typically, a reminder notice would go out, but so you did send the reminder notice out, but did it go out like just before the strike, or did you not send it out because you knew it was so close to the strike date, or we were into the strike perhaps by then, and so they didn't go out then till January? Could you just clarify that for me?
No, yes, certainly. They went out in December as soon as the strike was resolved, as soon as the postal disruption was resolved. So they went out mid-December.
Okay, thank you. That's why, yes, people would have received it, and now we're starting to see the payment from it. So it wasn't that our reminder notices were stuck in the backlog. I hear you. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Martin while we have her with us? Member Demare.
Again, there's new question for me. So maybe you could answer this. I see on this analysis comments section here that aging of arrears, 3 years or greater, there's 8 properties estimated at $445,000. Does the town ever do this? Go to the taxpayer and say, look, pay up or you're going to sell your property underneath you? And how many times does that happen?
So through the chair, so I've been with the town for 2 years. I started in 2023. We do every year, we review the list of eligible properties. We currently have eligible for this year 116 properties at approximately $1.2 million with arrears that we're preparing to send final or last notices out prior to registration. So it is a process that we go through regularly every year. So we, of that group, there is secured collection. We noted in the report of registered, there's some mixed situations, some of which are properties. There can be disputed issues or legal matters that may result too. So we are actively moving and making collection efforts on every single property that's in arrears and working with those property owners. Since I've been here, there have been 3, I think 2 just before I arrived and 1 sale after, all for, I believe, non-residential or non-occupied properties. Typically when they reach the sale point, most properties, if there's a lender attached, you don't see them going to tax sale. It's very often not something that happens very often. They're usually resolved throughout collection, the tax sale registration process, which is very successful.
So if you've got 3 years or greater, you got 8 of them. So the question is, if it was a little more aggressive, we'd maybe get those properties sold sooner and bring in the results of that sale into the city's revenue. Since that's in 3 years or greater, so they're pretty long in the tooth, right? So I'm saying, when do you pull the trigger on it?
So they have to be eligible. To be eligible, it's any part of 2 years. So we're reviewing this year for any properties that had arrears of any part of 2023 or longer. There are opportunities for the property owner to enter into an extension agreement if they're registered. So they could have gone through a timeline of being on a payment plan and defaulted. As soon as they default, they go back into the timeline of registration. So it's a bit of a complicated process, not a straightforward answer, but it is situationally, each situation is a little bit different, but we are actively acting on collection on all of the properties.
So it seems to me you're giving them sort of a bit of a rope there to continually say, no, I'm not going to, don't sell my property, I'm going to come up with something, and maybe some do, maybe some don't. I'm just wondering, would you shorten that rope?
So the timeline is very tight. So once the property is registered, they have 365 days. And when there's an actual lien registered on the property, they can only make full payment. So that's very restricting. They have to make arrangements to either enter into an extension agreement with us, a legal extension agreement, or where they pay their taxes over 2 years, including upcoming levies and interest estimates, so that they're out of debt within 2 years, or they pay in full. If they don't, after the 365 days, they're eligible for sale, and we move forward and advertise. And it takes time, but it does happen. We had one property that was eligible last year, and on the first day of advertisement, the property owner reached out and made full payment of the arrears. So that sale was canceled. So it is a process that works well, and it does have, various, there's differences for every situation, and based on the timeline and where, like, if a payment plan is executed or not.
Okay, so that you couldn't shorten it up then by having it be more aggressive on it?
We're being as aggressive as we can be.
Okay, so that's one to know, yeah. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from committee members?
Yes.
Councillor Vardy? Yes, you're next.
Yes. Thank you. So what I'd like to know, sorry, I've got battling dogs here. What I'd like to know is how much advertising do we do or outreach about prepayment of taxes? I know that I'm on an automatic payment plan that I pay all my taxes over the first 10 months of the year. So how much do we advertise that? Because you don't have to worry about reminding people or, sending out notices, what have you.
Yeah, so we do provide reminders when we send out our final tax bills every year. It's something that's online. It's something that we try to extend to every customer that we come into contact, especially when we're going through these situations where we are dealing with customers in arrears. We're always offering it, and we're requiring it if they're entering into a payment plan. And the other piece is that because we bill for water, it's very convenient for us to do that at the same time. So we offer that if we know a customer is interested in water payment plan, we offer that for taxes, and we have set up our forms so they can easily do it with one form. Hope that helps and answers that. We also prioritize, so anytime we're offering payment options, we try to make sure that's front and center and the first thing that the customer sees.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Those answers were quite helpful.
Thank you.
Last chance. Any other questions by committee members? Okay, then the resolution is resolved that Report Finance 25-08, 2024, the tax arrears status update dated January 23rd, 2025, be received for information. And to our clerk, you're not allowed to call it the canary in the coal mine resolution, please. So all those in favor of that by show of hands, please. Councillor Vardy?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion is carried. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it was a long meeting tonight, and I thank you for your patience. But on item 10, you'll be happy to know under correspondence, we have none. Under item 11, I don't believe we have any other business unless anyone would like to raise something. I don't see anything. Then just a reminder that our next Finance Committee meeting is scheduled for February 27th, 2025 at 6 p.m. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.